Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live here on, Tuesday, February the 11th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at 440 Sports Network. You can follow me on X at JT_Ruhnke. No Stoney today. Had a little bit of a mix-up with some technical difficulties and whatnot, so had to move some things around. No matter, though. He'll be back on Thursday because we have an absolutely loaded show for you today. That's right, boys and girls. We finally sit down here and talk about the quarterback class in the upcoming 2025 NFL draft. But before we do that, got to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, ML Rose, 7 wonderful locations around the Nashville area in Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and coming soon to East Nashville in Inglewood. Thank you also to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. And if you want to get in on the conversation here, like so many of you in the comments, Matt, D Good, Team Ramrod, Carlos, Hurricane Lou, join us and do us a favor by going over to the 440 Sports YouTube channel where you can join the conversation. But without further ado, I'm excited to bring on my guest today, Sean McEvoy of QB Takeover, coach over there at QB Takeover. Obviously, if you are a fan of the Hot Read podcast, you know him. Quarterbacks coach for Malik Willis, also worked some with Will Levis and so many other NFL caliber quarterbacks, including the Super Bowl MVP this year, Jalen Hurts. So, Sean, how are you doing? And how cool was that to see on Sunday night when he won the MVP and the Eagles won the Super Bowl?
Yeah, first of all, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. And, you were nice enough to not blame the technical difficulties on me, but it definitely was me. So the reason you're seeing me instead of Stoney here as well is my fault. So big shoes to fill. I'm very aware of what it takes to replace a guy like Stoney here. But no, very cool. Jalen was one of the guys that we trained a bunch in college. We did his whole pre-draft process leading up to the 2020 draft that year. Still work with him in the off seasons now. So having one of our guys, and in my case, the first of one of our guys to win a Super Bowl and be a Super Bowl MVP, obviously really cool. And I'm a Philly guy, so he won it for the hometown team, so even double that. But yeah, it's been fun. We're on the Super Bowl hangover here this week still, but getting ready to really get into the off season with all of our NFL guys, and happy to talk draft and QBs and all things Titans with you always, JT.
Yeah, and it is that's a great achievement and wonderful to get one of your guys there and shining in that moment. But yeah, like you said, we are on to the offseason. The NFL machine never stops. Guys are going out there and they're starting their training for next season and beyond. And some other guys are looking to prove their chops in the 2025 draft cycle. And I think that's where we're going to start our conversation today. And there's so many, it's an interesting class, right? Like last year you had so much top end talent that you were talking about, maybe 6 or 7 guys going that are possible in the first top 50 picks. You end up getting 5 of those guys in the top, or I guess 6, because JJ McCarthy was there too. You get those guys all go in the first round. This year it's a little bit different, and we're going to get to a lot of the quarterbacks because as we've said on the show, and as many people know, I don't think it's set in stone that the Titans would go with one at the 101, but you can't talk about the 2025 draft class without talking about Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, the two at the top here. We definitely have our thoughts on Cam Ward here and Shedeur Sanders on this show, but I think getting your outside opinion on these guys would help kind of further the narrative here before, we're still, 70, 80 days out. It's way too early to be honing in on any of these guys and planting your flag on someone, but I think it's important to get these outside, opinions to kind of inform how we look at what the Titans may do going forward. That if they were not to take a quarterback here at 101, it's not doom and gloom. There are many other options out there in this draft and some guys who are worth taking a stab on. But the main question I want to pose to you is first your 10,000 foot view of these two guys, but also in those 10,000 foot view, can these guys be kind of compared to quarterbacks of last year and before that as maybe top 5 guys overall? when you're going and talking about these guys from a 10,000-foot view, are they deserving of being in that top 5 consideration this year, given some of the talent at other positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest question. And you're right. We have a ways to go before we have to make our final determinations. But I do think it's good process to look at it now because the film's done, right? Like
Yeah.
everything they've put on the field is done. So talking about it now gives us a chance to focus on that piece without being overwhelmed by how good they looked in their pro day or oh he looked like the best kid at the combine or that type of thing. So I like that we're having the discussion now. All right, so I do believe those two guys are clearly the top two guys in this draft class. So I think that's very fair assessment. I agree with that. I think for a lot of teams and the Titans in particular, maybe whether they would like Ward or whether they like Shador Sanders will probably have a lot to do with the fit of their offense or the perceived fit of their offense, right? I think that's very fair. And then the last piece is the one that you pointed out is, you know, regardless of how high they may or may not get drafted this year, where do they really stand in the world of, say, the last 2, 3, 4 years of quarterback prospects, right? So let's start there and we'll work our way backwards. I think, unfortunately, if you're a team that needs a QB and you're picking in the first 3, I don't think you have that clear cut. You know, let's think about the Joe Burrow, even the Trevor Lawrence, the CJ Stroud, or even Bryce Young. Like, no doubt about it, if we have the number 1 pick and we need a QB, we just run our ballot or whatever, run our pick right up to
slip.
the
You got to run
right,
it up. It's set in
run it
stone.
right up to the
Just like Brian Callahan said at the Senior Bowl, right? They when they had the first overall pick and he was in this situation before, it was a different scenario because they knew that from the second they were going to take Joe Burrow, right? It's not the same this year.
super easy. So yeah, I don't think so. Now the question, okay, so where do they slot in, right? I think if you compare it to last year, they're just certainly not where the top 3 guys were. Not even close to where those top 3 guys were in last year's draft class, in my opinion. Now, I wasn't as high on J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix as some others were. So for me, I could see Cam. I'm going to put Cam slightly ahead of Shador as an overall prospect. We'll talk about the fit for the Titans specifically here in a second. But I would put Cam probably above McCarthy, in my view, if I'm comparing to last year, because of the potential high ceiling, right? So, and this is where we get into that trait conversation.
Yeah.
And, we've seen the trait thing maybe not work out in Tennessee and other places. The Colts fans are looking at Anthony Richardson, hoping those traits pan out at some point. So the traits aren't the be all end all, but because of what Cam could be if all those pieces hit, I'd like him as a prospect coming out maybe higher than I have McCarthy and certainly higher than Nix. I would probably put Shador right there around where Nix was. So if it's me the last 2 years, maybe Cam, then JJ, all of them after, even Penix, and obviously the top 2 guys. Or top 3 guys, right?
Yeah.
And then I would have Shador and Nix right there together. So I think it's comparable to, remember, JJ and Bo are still top 12 picks from last year.
Yeah.
We're not talking second round guys by any means. So that's probably where they fall in this year, in my opinion. Now, last year, 7 teams desperately needed a quarterback. That's the reason they all went in the top 12. If we look at them just as purely rated as a prospect, I don't think JJ and Bo would have been projected as first round picks maybe in a year like this year. I don't know that Nix or McCarthy would have been rated as highly as Will Levis was coming out as a draft prospect. That's the other scary part. If you're like a Titans fan, I can't wait to move on. Let's go get our next guy. Well, guess what? The Cam Ward, Shador Sanders, there's going to be a lot of evaluators that don't have them rated as highly as they had Will coming out. Some won't have them as high as they have Malik Willis coming out, right? You ended up going the 3rd round. Now, Pat Mahomes wasn't rated as highly as Will Levis, right? So this isn't the answer, but if we're talking kind of, you said kind of the 15,000 foot view, I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? And so lastly, it comes down to fit. And if I'm a Titans fan, if I'm looking through the lens of I think what Callahan wants this offense to look like at its best, I think there's some traits of Shedeur Sanders, his ability to kind of play more on schedule, be more of a true pocket passer, um, stand in there and work through progressions and let it rip, even as things are breaking down around him. I see more of that in Shedeur than I see in Cam. So even though I told you up front, I think Cam's got more high end talent. I think he's got the bigger arm. I think he's more of a mechanically sound, effortless thrower, and certainly has some more mobility than Shedeur does. I think if Callahan wants to run the offense like he ran with Joe Burrow,
Mm.
I think Shedeur can get you closer to that than maybe Cam Ward can.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and agree with you on where I would rate the quarterbacks last year. There's been a lot of talk about how if you insert a guy like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders into last year, they probably project around that QB5, QB6 range, nowhere
I think
near. And
that's
so,
right.
when you're looking at it this year, right, as much as it might fit, there's always going to be something that comes with taking them first overall, the
Yeah.
101. That's the part where I think the debate is certainly going to kind of roar the most this
Yeah.
upcoming draft cycle here. But you bring up a lot of interesting ideas of if the fit is there and you are a team that needs him, you may end up having to swallow the pill of maybe not being one of these elite talents, but certainly a need when you have the opportunity here. And you talk about the traits and how they might lend themselves. And we've heard a lot from the Titans and Brian Callahan specifically already talking about running an offense on time, like you said with Shedeur Sanders, but also talking about what a quarterback needs to have between the ears, the psychological portion of it, the ability to play within that structure for themselves. And with Shedeur, maybe that's where you start to see the connections there, but it's not like Cam Ward is necessarily, that far behind him, right? There is a reason why he's still being touted as one of these top two quarterbacks. And I
Sure.
think the question that when you're looking at a guy like that, like a Cam Ward, who maybe is not playing as much on time, how do you coach up some of that mental aspect of the position, the processing, the decision making, the time on task? Is that something that if Titans fans wanted to say, well, Cam Ward can still have the better intangibles and the traits, we can teach him those things? Is that something that they could still do if they want to take the talent over maybe the fit?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. I don't think there's any stylistic type of QB that can't learn how to do it a different way. The question is, what's your timetable and what's your development plan for that? And are you willing to see it through? Do you have the patience to see it through? You could argue that you haven't seen a lot of that patience to see a development plan through with the Titans over the last few years, right? So if they're going to take Cam Ward and they realize, okay, maybe what he was asked to do in college isn't what we need him to do here, but we like the way he's built. We like the ways he's made. We like his confidence / cockiness. We know he's a leader. We see the potential. So is it going to be rough his rookie year? Is it going to be rough his first 2, 3, 4 starts? Maybe, but okay, we're on a 3-year plan here. We're not going to the playoffs next year. I don't think I don't know how they look at it, but
Yeah.
we know we have other pieces we need to surround him with. And so if you're willing to kind of let him take his lumps, take it slowly, and truly be willing to stick through the progression, then I think without a doubt you take a guy like Cam Ward and you put faith in your offensive staff, right? Like there's a reason Callahan has the reputation he has, the trust he has in Nick Holtz, right? It's like that's his guy to help there. And I'm forgetting Bo Hardegree's still there, correct?
Yes.
Right? Like
Yep.
like everyone talks very highly of Bo. I know Malik liked him a lot when he got a chance to work with him last offseason. So yeah, if you feel like you got the right coaches, then yeah, I would. If it's me, I'm taking the higher potential, better trait guy because I know we have a plan to develop him and we'll get him to where we need him to be. So I would assume Titans are looking at it very much that way, where you have trust in our offensive staff and we can get them there. So, but once again, you have to realize a lot of it's going to be new for him. So
Yep.
it may not look as crisp as you want it to look out of the gate. Now, if you're trying to win as many games as you can this year, and when we might have to start a rookie right out of the gate week one, then that's where you look to maybe who's the more pro ready in this system. And that might be Shador. It might even be a Kyle McCord or some of the other guys we might talk about here in a minute. So that's the decision they have to make. And, that's the hard one, because does Callahan feel like he's got, the rope to see a process through? Or does he feel like he needs to deliver some results right away? So we'll see.
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. I do, hypothetically, like, if you were to take one of these guys, Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, the top two talents here, if they were to have a longer leash and maybe a more 3-step plan, is it plausible to see them potentially bench a guy or just let them sit behind a veteran for half a season, maybe an entire season? Would that be something that you could see benefiting these quarterbacks early on in their careers, like a Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, more than starting them immediately?
Without a doubt. I mean, that is the ideal path for any quarterback. I don't care who you are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Jordan Love model is going to be the ideal situation for any quarterback, no matter how talented, coming out. The reality is, or even the Michael Penix model, you got almost a full season of that last year, and we know how long it took Mahomes before he got on the field. You look at Jalen Hurts, who we just talked about, who wasn't brought in to start right away when he was drafted. Even a guy like Malik, like you saw him in year 3, the way he was able to produce versus when he's out there right away as a rookie and he's not ready yet, right? So that's the model. Once again, not every team is in a position to be able to do that. And do you have the right veteran to kind of bring him along and kind of keep you afloat while that guy's developing in the background? But like, I would argue Trevor Lawrence could have, been better set up now if he had gone through that model. So to me, there's no like who needs it and who doesn't. That's ideal for every single QB. But I think interesting, if you're the Titans, is there a veteran that makes sense where maybe we can, certainly raise our floor. Let's, get us 7-8 wins this year. Start to show kind of, proof of the Callahan system, bring and develop some of the other players around him offensively, especially while this guy develops in the background, and then be ready to cut him loose. I think, if I'm looking for an ideal model, that might be the one. But now you're talking about finding a bunch of pieces, right? So
yeah.
If finding quarterbacks were easy, everyone would have, except for the next 10 years, right?
Right. You talk about in finding those and evaluating those guys. You talk about how maybe some evaluators would have had Will Levis ahead of guys like this. Like, 100%. It is still, at the end of the day, it is a crapshoot, and it's the process you take there. I think you bring up an interesting point with the Jordan Love and Patrick Mahomes model, two franchises that, if you look at the front office of the Tennessee Titans now with Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker, that is a model that they have found success in. And so I think that's an interesting, path to follow for the Titans, and could be something they end up doing. Getting a little bit more into the weeds on Shedeur versus Ward. And this is a question Stoney wanted to pose to you. In which he said, to me, Ward has the quicker release than Sanders, but Sanders looks like a quicker processor. At times, though, Stoney feels like Sanders' release is a little too slow, like how someone looks when they're really thinking about their technique and doing it the right way. When you're coaching someone up about technique issues, what is the give and take like about when balancing proper technique and quicker processing ability? Do you sacrifice some of that processing speed to get the technique right, or are there certain issues that you're willing to live with because the processing speed is so fast?
Yeah, first of all, I love the question. And I think he's right in his evaluation of those two players. Because I do believe that Cam is more efficient and kind of, like I said, more mechanically sound, quicker release, looks just smoother overall. The other thing is to understand when we talk about like, okay, I think Shador processes faster. Maybe I don't see that from Cam. I, I just want to hedge it a little bit with it's what's being asked of them within the
Hmm.
system they're running, right? Like Cam's value is to kind of sit back and almost slow play it, use his athletic ability to extend the timeline. So can he not process as fast as Shador, or maybe the style that he was asked to play, it was harder to see it on tape, right? But to answer your actual question, um, it is that is the fine line. It's like the idea of like in our normal jobs, I'm like, am I trying too hard to be perfect, or do I need to like get things done by the timeline,
Hmm.
right? There's that thin
Yep.
line of like, so I think it depends on where you are and what you're focused on. If you have mechanical things that you're working through, then there is an opportunity, and I maybe the ideal way is to slow it down, be really thoughtful and intentional about what it is that you're trying to do physically, which may then slow your mental side down. I think there is a true time and place for that. The problem is when you're under fire, you're in a game situation, you don't have that time. This is why, from a mechanical or that you were asking me about how I would train somebody or things like that, that's why so much of that focus is now. It's the
Yes.
February to June that I want to make any maybe mechanical changes. If I want to work on speeding up Shador's, arm path or his release time, or if I want to work on his sequencing or get more power from his hip or things like that, I want to focus on that now, knowing that once we get to camp, he's got to go make plays. He's got to put the ball where the coach needs to put it. And at that point, he can't over focus on the physical or the mechanical issues. So, yeah, it's interesting. Like it'd be interesting. I'd love to know just if Stoney feels like he's seeing Shador work through maybe the mechanical stuff too much,
Hmm.
or how much of that's just the DNA of who Shador is as a quarterback. Um, some guys are just naturally more efficient athletically than others are. And so you'll see that difference in speed, and you can make minor changes, but the DNA of that player probably isn't going to change a bunch.
Right.
Um, but I do think you can train in the off season ways to improve both Cam's ability to process in real time and make decisions faster, and Shador's ability to just mechanically be more efficient.
Certainly, yes. And another one of those traits, I think that you talk about either having to build one up or, kind of wrangle in is arm strength,
Yeah,
specifically with Cam Ward and his ability to make some of those just absolute wow factor plays versus
yeah.
maybe the little more simplification of what a Shadur Sanders brings. And of course, I think everyone would agree that Cam Ward certainly does have the arm strength box checked over a guy like Shadur Sanders, but
100%.
how big of a deal is that when looking at these two guys at the top of the class? In short, there's been a lot of conversation about how, in circles that I have talked to people that arm strength is really more of a situational thing for a team in the scheme that they run versus, a reason that you have to take a player. Is that something that you find sometimes as well, or is it truly that you want to take the guy with the bigger arm?
I think there's a minimum threshold, of course. Like you have to have enough
Yeah, right.
of an NFL arm. So let's start there. Then I do agree that we're splitting hairs to some extent. Um, you know, anytime you're evaluating anything for anything, outside of football or inside of football, you like the best, right? I want
Yeah,
the
right.
smartest guy over the guy who's pretty smart, right? Or I want the tallest guy over the guy who's a little shorter. So yeah, the guy who's got more arm or bigger arm or more powerful or can get it there with more velocity, there is something to be said for that. But once again, it goes back to kind of the DNA of the player. And as long as they can play within their system and who they are, meaning that if I don't have as big of an arm, then I have to be better with my anticipation of throws. My footwork has to be more cleaner or more clean. I need to be able to play on time a little bit better
Yeah.
to make up for, like if we're if I'm throwing a 12-yard out to the left side, that ball has to get there at the same time. If I have a bigger arm, then I have a little bit more room for error where
Right.
I could,
Yep.
even if my footwork was a little sloppier, obviously that's not the goal, but even if it was a little sloppier or I was a little slower, or I didn't quite see it as quickly and I hesitated, well, my arm can make up that time that I lost
Mhm.
in the lack of processing. Where if I'm on the lower end of the arm strength spectrum, man, I better be really, really good with everything else I do, which I do think Shador is. Like, that's the credit we were talking about earlier. We see fit. We're talking about his ability to process. We
Right.
talk about him being on time. That's what you see from a player like that. And you see that all through the NFL, right? Like, we can talk about Josh Allen and, like Lamar's got a big arm and Jalen Hurts doesn't. Jalen Hurts
Yeah.
does not. He's a low tier NFL arm. Tua is a low tier NFL arm.
You can even talk about last year with Bo Nix. Certainly
A
not the
hundred
biggest arm
percent,
ever, and it
hundred
still
percent,
really worked for the Broncos this year.
because they understand their offense. They're on time. Their footwork's really clean, and they anticipate windows opening, so they get the ball out a little quicker, and that makes up for the arm, right? So, yeah, I think that's the right way to think about it. What's nice for a young player and a developing player, it's nice to have a little bit of that room for error
Yeah.
because I'm not going to see it as clearly. I'm not going to. So the fact that maybe I'm a half a, step late, but my arm still allows me to get that ball into a tight window that maybe the other guy isn't able to, that can help you early on until you get more comfortable as an anticipatory thrower.
Yeah, I love it. You talk about these two guys and how much you already know that, but how much you're going to learn in the upcoming draft cycle when you get your hands on them and get into the interviews. Obviously, there's been so much talk about Shadur Sanders, mostly because the Titans have been able to meet with him. They have
It's a
not met
hundred
with Cam
percent.
Ward yet, and that's always the one thing I say when we talk about the combine or any of these. You never know what the meeting room is like, and so it can change in an instant. But I think it's really interesting to see the gives and takes between the two and how easily those can be made up for a team that comes off a season with Will Levis that certainly they thought they could have made up for some of those things, and yet
Yeah.
it just didn't end up working. And so I think that will be really interesting. So sounds like at the end of the day, these two guys will most likely be top 10 picks, barring a 2021 stunner like we
Yeah.
saw with Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis and Desmond Ritter and those guys. But there's been a really interesting development that is Jackson Dart and
Yeah.
his rise up the
Yeah.
board. I want to hear from you if you think that he really is deserving of maybe being a first round guy, or is this more of just a simple publicity, pushing of the guy via agents and other guys to really prop him up early in this draft cycle?
We talked earlier about how just in general, this is such a tough year to evaluate the quarterbacks. And a lot has to do with, especially with those top two, they didn't play a lot of great competition. Neither of them played
Hmm.
top 25 teams. So
Hmm.
it's like, how do you evaluate when they're just, Cam Ward's just on the team that's better week in, week out? Well, the same thing applies as you get to Jackson Dart is like, people call it like the Lane Kiffin tax. Like, how do I evaluate a QB through that lens? They're gonna set up explosive shot plays. They're gonna throw the ball 40 times a game. Lane Kiffin's gonna dial up layups, right, for my quarterback all over the field. You hate to fall into that trap of kind of scouting the helmet, but it's hard to watch Jackson Dart and everything that he's done and not think about Matt Corral just a few years ago,
Yeah.
right? Another guy who looked explosive within the offense, and then the transition didn't go. So is that because he just looked good in the scheme, right? Did Lane Kiffin prop him up, or what is that guy in his own right, right? What I like about Jackson Dart is you've certainly seen a progression in his development from his freshman year out at USC through his last 3 years at Ole Miss. That's promising. That's good to see, right? This isn't one of those
Hmm.
Kenny Pickett played like pretty average ball for 5 years and they had one good year, right? Or like Zach Wilson looked like he was going to get benched his second to last year and then one good year. That's troubling because am I just buying, the rise, or like he's probably more in the middle of those two guys than really the top end. With Jackson Dart, you can argue like, hey, he's continuing. His completion percentage has gotten better every year. I think he had 10 more passing touchdowns this year than last year. His interceptions keep going lower and lower and lower. So I'm seeing a guy growing and developing in the system, feeling like he's still on the rise up. That's what I like about what I see from Jackson Dart. But then you got to go back. At least Jackson Dart played good teams in the SEC, played top 10 opponents. Now, obviously, LSU, Georgia, those were the games he struggled
Yep.
the most. But okay, you expect that when you're playing good defenses and good teams. There's some other game when you watch the film, like Kentucky. There's some games where it's like how that he should look better against that defense, right? Some games where he was really struggling to just make easy throws. But then he played great in his, in the bowl game and kind of went out on a big high. And I think what Jackson Dart gives you is a guy who's showing an ability to produce at a high level. And once again, that progression of development, which makes me think as a coach myself that he's able to be coached and able to be developed that way. And then I think there's just that natural, like, well, I don't love the other two. I don't love Shador. I don't love Cam. Maybe Cam's got this. Maybe Shador will be, but I don't know. And then you start searching for like the next guy,
Yeah.
right? So I think all those factor. And the other thing is, I think it's pretty clear, like 3 teams definitely need a quarterback when you think about the Giants, the Titans, and the Raiders. Well, so I can't only have 2 first-round guys if
Right.
3 teams need. Now, Sam Darnold, all the veteran movement could be in play. But at the end of the day, it feels like there needs to be at least 3 first-round QBs.
Yep.
So who's the other one, right? I think that's where Jackson Dart's coming from. It'll be interesting to see him at the combine because you finally get to see him like throw side by side with the other guys. Obviously, at the Senior Bowl, he was the only kind of top tier guy there. So maybe he looked good throwing next to Jalen Milroe because Milroe looked like a disaster.
Well, anybody could have been better than Jalen Milroe.
That's exactly right. So the question is, okay, but if he's actually standing next to Cam Ward and Shador Sanders, which actually now that I think about it, the combine won't happen because it goes alphabetical. So they'll probably be in 2 different groups, right?
Yeah.
Like Shador and Sanders and Ward will be later. So Dart will throw next to whoever is in the A through L.
Will Howard or someone like that. Will Howard.
Our guy Max Brosmer, the kid from Minnesota. They'll throw hand in hand. But so that's where at least you'll be able to stack them up a little bit more and see what they look like next to each other. But like I say, Dark's not gonna jump off the page with any of his traits. I think he's got good size. I think he's got an okay arm. I don't think he's elite in those. He's obviously not a mobile guy that's gonna give you +1 in the run game or anything like that, right? So the things you normally want to check boxes on, I don't know how many of those he checks, but I think he's, like I said, he's a producer for sure.
Yeah, and we always, even in a down class, where there's always going to be quarterbacks to talk about. And if the Titans were to say end up passing on a Ward or a Shador Sanders and going with some of that top end talent, whether it be Hunter, Carter, trading back and incurring more picks like that, I do think if they went out and signed a veteran guy and still were able to pick up, say, a Will Howard or Kyle McCord on day 2, late day 2, early day 3. I think that still is a really interesting development for this team. We saw that last year, minimal success, but we saw what New Orleans was able to do with a guy like Spencer Rattler down there in New Orleans. So I guess my question is, Will Howard and Kyle McCord, it feels like you have those top 3, and then you have a guy like Will Howard and Kyle McCord as your 4 and 5 here right now. What do those 2 guys maybe bring to the table in terms of kind of making the case to be in that day 2 range? I would say certainly, I think for Will Howard, he's shown the ability to win, which clearly goes a long way.
For sure. No, I'll tell you right now, I think McCord may end up as my 3rd guy. Like, I think he's got a chance to play himself in front of Dart for me. And I think McCord is a head and shoulders above Howard. is the way I look at those, because I think McCord gives you the probably the best blend maybe that we've seen in a couple of years of draft classes of like could play right away, pro
Hmm.
ready, like the things we like about Shador, playing on time,
Yeah.
works through his progressions, kind of a pro style system. First at Ohio State and then at Syracuse, what he did here the last year. And big time trait. Like he's a big dude. He's a
Yeah.
powerful dude. He's got the big strong arm. I was down there in Dallas around the Shrine Bowl, and McCord was the guy that stood out. Quite honestly, him and Brosmer, just from like a ability to look the part, right? Like play on time, be really accurate. But McCord just has a big arm that stands out. There's a reason why he was the big time recruit to Ohio State
Yeah.
originally, right? Which is not something you could say about Cam Ward or Shador. Like there's a reason Cam Ward, went the FCS route first, right? And then played his way. And, Shador had other options, but they weren't
Yeah.
top 10 power four options right out of the gate, you know? Um, so with McCord, you see like the production, the pro style, the fit, and some of the trait stuff. To me, he's a very interesting and another guy that would fit like hey, if I needed to play a guy right away and I thought I would get maybe a floor raiser, I think McCord's super interesting there. And then you said it with Howard. Howard is, there's once again like a stability level there. I think you like what he's made of. If you've watched him even like in pregame and postgame through all these huge games through the playoffs, you like the way he carries himself. You like the leadership intangibles. Not going to check a ton of boxes from a trait standpoint. I think he's going to end up being pretty average arm, mobility, processing, things like that. Wasn't asked to do a ton, obviously, in that system with all those playmakers around him.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone thinks Will Howard's a guy that can't hack it at the next level and just completely falls apart. I mean, it
Sure.
doesn't seem to be in his makeup, right? So I love Howard way more as a true day three guy. That's where I think even at that point you start looking at Quinn Ewers a little bit, or you start God, Milrow has looked so bad over the last
Yeah.
month and so up and down. But man, if a team wants a Anthony Richardson light reach, are they gonna someone fall in love? I could see the traits taking Ewers or Milrow above Howard, but to me, McCord's like a absolutely in that top of the second tier. And I won't
Interesting.
be surprised if you start hearing, Dark's the golden child right now making the rise. I wouldn't be surprised if you start hearing a little bit more McCord as a potential third best QB. And if they're trying to slide someone even into late first, early second round, I could see McCord's name finding that spot for sure.
I think that one's a super interesting one, specifically if this team, the Titans, wanted to trade back and
Yeah.
maybe get more picks, find a bridge guy, and take a flyer on a McCord to look at next year's draft class and kind of plan for the future that way. If they truly are, not wanting to pay the top 10 Shedeur Sanders price for a guy who fits what seemingly is Callahan's mold here as the guy who plays more on time.
Yeah.
Taking a flyer like on Kyle McCord could be a really interesting one. You bring up also some of those other guys. Is there anything, that could be said for a guy like Quinn Ewers or Jalen Milrow that hasn't already been said? Are they pretty much at their ceiling right now already in where
every
they
year
can
you
go?
have every year I have like man, I wish those guys had stayed in college and played one more year.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
mean,
both of those guys fit that list. Now, the problem is they probably had to go somewhere else to do it. Like, Quinn's kind of get pushed his way out to the draft.
right.
Milrow to some extent as well. I think you would have loved to have seen those guys maybe do what Carson Beck did or do what Cam Ward did last year. And is there a place I can transfer to play one more year? Because you just didn't see enough consistency in their games, either of those two. They just never kind of showed 4, 5, 6 games in a row where you saw them close to the trait potential that they have. And that's frustrating, right? I don't know as an NFL team that I feel great about drafting a player that I really never saw consistently succeed at the college level. That
Yeah.
would be very scary to me. We can say Kenny Pickett only had one good year, but at least I saw him produce for 9 weeks in a row, and I feel like I have something. Zach Wilson too, Malik at a at a lower level group of 5 school, but just went out there and produced for long stretches at a time. There's something I see there. Not having that consistent production would make it really scary for me to want to take one of those guys. So that's why, okay, Will Howard, I've seen him do it. Max Brosmer, I've kind of seen now. Max is he's a QB2 type,
Yeah.
right? But I think he's a guy who comes in, he's like, okay, he might be better than a couple QB2s that are hanging around, on some teams there, right? So once again, it's if you're lucky enough to feel like you're not forced into a pick and you can sit back and be choosy. I'm not talking about the Titans. I'm talking about other
Yeah.
teams around the league. Then I would certainly feel more comfortable on a more of a proven commodity, and Ewers and Milrow. You just got to really realize you're hoping for
Yeah.
it's a lottery ticket type pick,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I agree
Is the
with
way
that
I
for
look at
sure.
it.
Yeah, I love it, and a lot of interesting, like you said, it's a hard class to evaluate, and so
Yeah,
I think the final question here before
yeah.
we get out of here today, in a vacuum, right? Is there enough, in your opinion, for a team that is maybe potentially looking at a 2 to 3 year rebuild here? Is there enough there with some of these top end guys? Like we'll even throw a Dart or a McCord in there in those top 4, to justify spending that first early day 2 capital on them versus maybe once again in a vacuum. Obviously,
Yeah.
you're never going to be certain to get back up here again. But looking at the class next year, is there maybe any incentive to build a roster around? Maybe getting pieces around your eventual quarterback to then bring them in, a la what we saw with the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super
Yeah.
Bowl. Like you said,
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts by no means is one of the elite cream of the crop quarterbacks out there, but
Yeah.
when you have a team around him like the Eagles do, you can get pretty far and even win the whole dang thing. So, in your opinion, is this class enough to take one of these guys, or is it really a matter of we're going to take the guy because we need one, but we would like to ultimately keep our hand in the race for next year?
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that no one ever wants to talk about. The reality is, if you like a guy at pick 20, then take
Mm-hmm.
him at 1 or 2 or 3 or wherever you pick, right? Like
Yeah.
that part doesn't really, we get caught up in like, oh, he's not a true number 1 overall. I mean, best case scenario, yeah, I'd love to trade back, get
Trade back
another
and still
first
get him.
round for
Yep.
next year, and then still get the guy I like at 12. That's ideal. Maybe that's what Denver got to do with Bo Nix last year, right? Or even McCarthy with the
Yeah.
Vikings. If they liked him that much, maybe they did kind of get to sit and wait and still get their guy. But the Titans don't have that luxury. So yeah, the answer to your question is yes. If you like Shador or Cam Ward as a potential fit, then you take them at 1, and you don't overthink it. As long as I have that development plan and I'm willing to have the patience to see it forward and know that I'm not, we might not win more than 6, 7 games next year, and then maybe we get to 8 or 9 the next year. But in the meantime, I'm building these pieces around them, and 3 years from now, we have the team that can go compete the way we want to compete. Then yeah, I think any of those guys, and even a Dart McCord, if you pick them in the first round and you have a plan to develop them, you're gonna be fine. That's the true answer. But yeah, the other thing of, hey, can I get better now? Can I get Abdul Carter? Can I somehow trade back? Like, can I get the Giants to come up? Can I trade back to 3, have them give me next year's first round? So now I'm armed with 2 first round picks next year. And that's the key, because then if I do love a guy, those 2 first rounds can get me up high enough to get him, even if I'm not the number 1 pick on my own, right?
Right.
So yeah, can I get, and you've heard, the Brinker and the new guys talk about, like, they want picks. They want all these picks. They want top 100. Well, you don't do that by picking a QB at 1
Right.
and then seeing what happens. You do it by trading back. You do it by making your team better over the next 1 or 2 years around. Then when you feel like you have the support system, then go grab your new QB. I think that's the way I'd love to do it. Maybe I bring the veteran in as a bridge in the meantime. So I know I just answered your question both ways. But yeah, if I like one of these QBs, take them at 1. There's no problem with that. And if you're right, you're right. No one's ever gonna,
Yeah.
say anything different. But I also obviously see the desire to want to be patient, improve the rest of my team, fill some of the other holes, and then maybe push the QB answer, at least the long-term answer,
Yeah.
down the road a little bit.
Yeah, wonderful. And like you said, that's what makes this at least draft cycle such an interesting one, because
It's going to be fun.
There's no clear answer at 1, and I'm sure that this will not be the last time that we talk to you about these guys, because it's always ever changing, and certainly anything can happen. But we appreciate you being here today, still able to get it in. We really appreciate you and your insight. Obviously, you over at Quarterback Takeover. Anything fun coming up, or is it back to the grind for you?
We are back to the grind. Most of our NFL guys kind of let the Super Bowl happen, and then everybody's kind of back to work. So our local Atlanta crew is getting back into swing this week. We have Max Brosmer as one of our QBs, the quarterback from Minnesota. So we've been doing his draft prep.
I was going to say he was a Shrine Bowl riser, a guy that I think still could be in play for to see what we can, and developmental guy in the 6th, 5th.
Yeah, there's no doubt he's a draftable player. I mean, I think he's got a chance, to get into the day 3 conversation, and but certainly you look at a 5th or 6th round. I think he's a guy that a team's going to take and just love all the intangibles for him. So we'll be in Indy for the combine with him, and once again, just another chance for me to see all the other guys as well. And so next time we talk, I'll have even more, actual seeing guys live. Hopefully, what's the word? Knowledge to bring you. But for sure, it's just kind of off-season swing now for NFL guys and the local high school guys in Georgia. So
yep,
that's
I
the
love
focus.
It. Yeah, awesome. Like I said, most likely, definitely not the last time we talk to you. Always a pleasure to have you on. Certainly in a year where the Titans need a quarterback, there's so much to be talking about. But that's going to do it for our show today. Thank you to ML Rose and Sinkers Beverages once again for sponsoring the show. They make it happen so that we can bring this show, me and Stoney, to you free of charge, because as D-Good said, I don't think Sean secretly took Stoney out. It was just the connection here. Stoney will be back on Thursday, and until then, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you then.